the landscape of state-owned industries and other large infrastructure projects that have influenced the shape of our landscape and, of course, our landscape profession. And FOLAR have assembled an influential and illustrious group of speakers who are going to share their experience with us and on their knowledge with us today. So it's going to be an interesting day's worth of speaking. The investment in state finance industries has resulted in post-war building boom of infrastructure and the development of industries that changed our landscape. The work by design and construction professionals has often gone unnoticed, but has been an important influence and an impact on our lives and the places where we live. We can't underestimate the significance and the contribution of landscape architects. Some of our most respected and influential landscape professionals, such as Brenda Colvin, Helen Morbridge, who's with us today, and of course, Dame Sylvia Crowe.
I'm sorry, can I just do something? Sorry. I need to try this in, please. Okay. Just need to stick it on this. Sorry. Okay.
And if I could just digress for one moment, I'd like to tell you a quick story. For me, Dame Sylvia Crowe has been one of the greatest influences of the 20th century landscape design. And she's also been a very significant influence on my own career. Right back from when I chose to be a landscape architect, I went to the Forestry Commission because I quite fancied having a career in forestry, not that I really understood what that entailed. And when the forester who was talking to me decided that I was probably a little bit too small to be wielding a chainsaw, he suggested that a career in landscape design might be more suitable to my stature. And in fact, there was a very famous landscape architect called Dame Sylvia Crowe who worked for the Forestry Commission and designed forests. And I thought, that sounds fantastic. That's what I want to do. I want to design forests. I want to have a Land Rover and a Labrador, and that's me sorted. That's sorted. Anyway, it didn't quite work out like that, but I did decide long and hard that landscape was actually going to be the career for me. So our paths crossed again when I was a student at Leeds. Dame Sylvia Crowe came to talk to us, and she was so inspirational. The students were in awe of her. She was quite elderly at the time, and sat there and we just listened to everything she said. And she was wonderful, and it just set us on a path to really wanting to change the world. I also had the pleasure of working on a project that was once hers. I worked on the decommissioning of Trausfinn nuclear power station in the 1990s, and it was a fascinating project. But what I really learned from it, because I had to do quite a lot of research into her design concept and all the detail that she went into, was the fact that she was able to move from very strategic landscape right through to detailed design with maintaining the highest quality, and it was really quite amazing, and it was a wonderful project to work on. And of course it's set in the very sensitive landscape of Snowdonia, but it's actually quite a sculptural building, and the landscape around it is beautiful. So the final sort of encounter with Dame Sylvia was about this time last year. I was at the LI, in the LI boardroom, and on the wall there's a list of all the past presidents of the Landscape Institute. And I've never really been one to be involved in the Institute. I have a practice of my own, I work hard, it's difficult to find the time, and I'm not a committee person. But I was sitting there and I thought, 90 years, 4 women have been president in 90 years. And I thought, well, I hope this time around, because it was just before the elections, I hope this time around that we're going to get some women standing. So I stood and you can imagine my shock when I got the email saying, private and confidential, but congratulations. It was really quite funny, but I decided if how should I expect somebody else to stand and put themselves up there if I'm not prepared to do it myself? So I thought I'd throw my hat into the ring, and as they say, the rest is history. 3 officers of the Institute who are females, so it's a real first, and it's great for our profession because that is quite different from all the other construction membership professions, bodies. So I do owe Dame Sylvia a great debt of gratitude. But what all these landscape architects who've worked on the estate, financed industries and infrastructure have in common was their ability to balance the needs of industry and infrastructure with the needs of people, place and nature. And I think it's really important to say that with the impact of climate change and the biodiversity emergency, it's making us all, governments included, look at how the traditional economics are not fit for purpose in the 21st century. And as we enter a new era of a low-carbon economy and reducing our dependence on fossil fuels, we have an opportunity to get the balance right when embarking on new infrastructure projects. And investment into large-scale infrastructure and energy industries is cyclical, and we should learn from these mega projects from the 20th century. It's an interesting time. The government's manifesto is to invest in infrastructure in all parts of the UK, basically anything north and west of Watford. And we'll see what the budget brings for us in next week. I think it is on the 11th of March. So I'm not holding my breath because they have a habit of watering things down. But we'll see, and I think it's really needed. So as we enter a new round of infrastructure, we have the knowledge, the skills and the opportunities to get the balance right. On one hand, we have energy, industry and transport, which is so important to the economy, but this needs to be balanced with the needs of people, place and nature. And that should be at the forefront of all our decision making, rather than being an afterthought and a nice to have. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from our speakers today.
I'm not an expert in any of the particular fields involved, so you might ask why I'm here, and I can't give you the answer. But I am fascinated by this period in many different manifestations, and how landscape is more than just a practice, it's a zeitgeist. And also the periodization of it, being the age I am, having lived through it with a father who was an architect with a great interest in landscape, and Landscape Institute Journal came into the house and all this kind of thing. I read New Lives, New Landscape when it was first issued. Jan Woudstra now has my father's copy of it, he tells me. I wondered where it had gone. And I paint landscapes, which is not represented in this talk. So I have some locus, I guess. Isn't this wonderful? What I really wanted was the one he did of Sizewell, with angels reaping the corn in the foreground. Just fabulous. There's quite a lot of poetry in this, because I think that does hold a clue to the developing ethos. So here is Auden in 1930, a quote you may know, but I thought it worked rather well with Nan Fairbrother's picture here of, I can't read the caption off here, but the way one person looking depressed, or two if you count the dog. And in a sense, it's how nothing's changed. But Auden is coming back later to tell us something a little bit different. There is this grounding, obviously, in policy making during the Second World War, responding to perceived problems of the previous 100 years, really. So the Scott and Youthwatch reports are crucial foundations for what even at that date is not yet known to be nationalised industries or state-financed industries. That is still embryonic, but the location of industry and the preservation of the country. Here's a bit more of that text. I'm sorry, I'm giving you a lot of text, which you won't have time to read, but I hope this material will be made available to you after the conference, so you can catch up. This is what I do with my students now. This is a nice publication. I don't know if anybody has a copy of that, like tiny little pocket book. wartime, your inheritance, an uncomic strip. It sort of reeks of architectural review thinking, but it's beautifully put together that all the page layouts go the other way, so you flip them over. And this is about, should industry be decentralized? They ask themselves, that is, taken out of towns, and so on. So there's a lot of this wartime reconstruction literature, exhibitions, penguin books going out to the troops, and so on. The people behind it are, in many cases, somehow linked to this exercise. I'm so pleased that I have this photograph. This group at the Architectural Association at the end of the 30s, committing themselves to a joint project. This was terribly important that it was collaborative and it was done with real research. I like that sort of strip diagram. That's from, I think, from the Percy Johnson Marshall papers, where allotments, market gardening, arable, etc., they are all linear, which is appropriate for a slightly sort of Soviet-looking new town at Farringdon. And this is in the context of the School of Planning and Research for National Development, a sort of breakaway from the Architectural Association, written up here by John Summerson in a suitably sceptical mood, but granting it something. And then this, I'd missed this piece by Brian Hackett in that book of interviews, which is fascinating that he sort of discovered this thing was happening and realized this was what he wanted, so he went there. This turns into the Association for Planning and Regional Reconstruction, and talking about mapping, this is one of my favorite maps, and I think they did have a sense of humor, and it'd be interesting to redo that map now, I think. You can't read the key to it, but it's I think well researched. Jacqueline Tyrwhitt was a key figure here, and through her, and also through Rouse, who was in the last picture, it links back to Patrick Geddes. And Patrick Geddes is the father of all this, I'm convinced. And then this is a sort of international moment. It's the imagery, really. All those people in the sardine can, we've got to get those poor people out of there with big roads. And the Tennessee Valley Authority, also a huge influence in the 1930s. A great sort of quasi-magical belief, I think, in its efficacy that was not remotely related to the actual thing itself. But here, a book based on an Architectural Review article, Lewis Mumford fueling this with his borrowing from Geddes of these phases of development, Paleotechnic, Eotechnic, Neotechnic. And W.H. Auden commenting on this in letter to Lord Byron. We're entering now the Eotechnic phase, thanks to the grid and all these new alloys, at least according to what Lewis Mumford says. A world of Artex underwear for boys, huge plate glass windows, walls absorbing noise, where the smoke nuisance is utterly abated, and all the furniture is chromium plated. But then on the second stanza, tram lines and slag heaps, pieces of machinery that was and still is my ideal scenery. All the way through this poem, he's talking about the modern world and then saying, actually, no. Save me above all from central heating. It may be D.H. Lawrence hocus pocus, but I prefer a room that's got a focus, and so on. This is meant for serious, but it's comic. I love the spray-on sunshine and scattering trees and fine houses over London. Well, the bulldozer works outside. The Architectural Review gets into this. Of course, they probably got sponsorship to do these special issues, so one can see why they have them, but graphics were always great graphics. And then I think the really kind of weighty stuff is coming from a smaller number of people, and Brenda Colvin is one of them. So here from Land and Landscape, I'm quoting from her again, the fact that this is a problem that can be solved, we only have to go off and do it, is so important. But there's so much more in Land and Landscape. It is, I think, a fantastic book that should be better known. And one group who do go off and do it in a sense that is state financed, because this project was 100% government funded. Lord Forrester, this one here, found this little window he just squeezed through to get 100% funding for a factory in North Wales with this team of entirely unexperienced young architects, of whom my father was one, and produced this building, which has been described as a folly, and in many ways it was. It was far too big and a very sort of overdone thing. If they'd built 10 small factories there instead, they would still be running possibly, but this one was a dinosaur, but it was a very beautiful dinosaur, and I'm still angry that it was lost. I got involved in that. There's the site with its pond, which actually goes back to the 18th century, and then the concrete vaults created by Ove Arup and Ronald Jenkins. Oh, that's disappeared. There's a bit of text from Kenneth Capon, and which was all about the whole democratic basis of this factory. This was the image of the New World. Then here, beyond the single project, the relationship between what the state is doing and encouraging and how landscape fits into it. This was something I didn't know about, but found it in my research via Clifford Tandy's book, and this is what came up in Richard and Luce's talk as well. And I think it feels as though, there are people here who know much more about this than me. It feels like one of those things where you can just see a crack opening in the edifice and you push something in there quick while the opportunity is there, and with any luck it stays. And here is Brenda Colvin seeing the deep side of this during the war. There are two attitudes, really. One is an optimistic one is a pessimistic one. Rolt is a pessimist, but it didn't actually stop him having a huge influence through this book, which was an absolutely unexpected hit, and not only, I think, influenced the reclamation of canals and the founding of the Inland Waterways Association, but a great deal more besides with canals. And there are doughty older protesters around, like Clough Williams-Ellis, who's been part of the Amenity Brigade since the end of the First World War. Here, in his own sort of humorous way, writing a parody of Thomas Love Peacock in order to protest against hydroelectric schemes in North Wales. A darker form of protest from Ian Nan, but also effective. There are a lot of angry people out there at this time. And then, well, we've seen both of these pictures already, and Sylvia Crowe is quite clearly a star. I'm afraid I never got to meet her. And always going beyond the visual to the deeper meaning, and the simple solutions. The story I love about Charles Finnith is when they were going to put street lighting along the access road, and she listened to them all these men talking about it, and then at the end she said, don't cars have headlights? And she won the point. And it's doing more with less, I think, is so often the key to this, and against the kind of previous fussing up of things. She describes in The Landscape of Power a suburban-looking arch near I think it's a hydroelectric scheme in Scotland. So this is all anti-suburban. Indeed, anti-suburban is almost the whole story, I think, from beginning to end. Geoffrey Jellicoe, well, now, do we buy this or don't we? I think it would have been okay without Ben Nicholson. Does anybody even know that it's there? But it pleased him, and it may please us. But here's Sylvia Crowe again, with, it's not only the power station, but it's all the power lines and the substations, which she particularly hated, that have to be dealt with. Nan Fairbrother, another amazing person, I think. Here, as written up by Simon Whartonby, and I don't think there has been very much writing about her, and I encourage Simon to write this in the journal that I edit for the 20th Century Society. But this is his opening. Putting this in context, by the end of the 60s, these older people are in the youth movement, and they all have common cause, as maybe we feel today. And Philip Larkin, never going to be an optimist, Larkin. Do you know this one? One of the interesting things, it was used as an epigraph to a Department of Environment publication in 1975 with a Lord Snowdon rather cheesy picture of a young woman in a sort of flimsy dress coming out of a lake. But before I snuff it, the whole boiling will be bricked in except for the tourist parts. First slum of Europe, a role it won't be hard to win with a cast of crooks and tarts. Well, there are two views. Sometimes when I'm talking to people about conservation and they say, oh, no, it's such a struggle. And I say, well, actually, if you look over the whole thing, it's the most incredible success. It's amazing what's been achieved since the war. And we shouldn't forget that. Yes, there's still more to do, but look at other countries and what they've done. We have done something really important, and we forget the things that are still there as being part of that achievement because we're too used to them. And it seems that around 1970, and it's a very significant moment, I think, there's just this run of luck, as it were. The right politicians are in place and they're listening and they feel empowered to do the right thing. And it moves over from the end of the Wilson government into the beginning of the Heath government, really without any hitch, which again is wonderful. So here is Derek Lovejoy in 1972 saying, actually, we're getting a grip on this, there's a lot still to be done. I'm coming now to finish with Max Nicholson. Who here knew Max Nicholson? 1, 2, 3. Would you agree that we should be hearing more about him?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
He didn't want one, but that's by the by. I met him, but only briefly to talk about the Festival of Britain, because it suddenly struck me what he'd been doing, writing on the World Review when it was edited by Gerald Barry, and with the plan for Britain from PEP, was actually the agenda of the Festival of Britain, which of course was a much smaller and temporary thing, but it even included an article in the World Review about the South Bank. It says, here's this fantastic resource, why aren't we doing something with it? And that's where they land up. But more than that, I think the whole sort of almost the international view of what Britain's role is to be in the future. It's quite a 1930s train of thought, but one we've rather lost hold of, that we are post-imperial already, we are also post-industrial, we have to reconceive what this country stands for, and its culture. That's our asset. This is what Stephen Tallant says in the projection of England in 1932. And that's what the Festival of Britain is doing. And through that opening structure of the festival, that you went in, you turned left to the land of Britain. You looked at geology and geography first. And then you went through other things, then you came out and you went into the people of Britain, because you can't understand the people without the land. So all that. And then the fact that he went on to set up land use consultants, some of whose publications I've been reading as background to this talk. So, if one wanted a kind of one man rather than a one woman figurehead for this, I think Max Nicholson ought to be in there. I'm very nearly up to time. I've got a little time. Yeah. I'm just kind of freewheeling here, but there's an Auden poem which includes the lines Lawrence Blake and Homer Lane, healers in our English land, they are lost and gone forever, they will never hold our hand. Lawrence was brought down by smut hounds, Blake went dotty as he sang, Homer Lane was killed in action by the Twickenham Baptist gang. Now most of that is quite irrelevant, but it's that little phrase, healers in our English land. I've been carrying it around with me for a long time as a book title, because that's a book I'd like to write, and I can think who's in it from that period, and Max Nicholson is one of them. Thank you.